Hello everyone, welcome today to Map Control CS. This is our 8th episode and our first episode after the rebrand as well. I am one of your hosts, Dream or Rory, joined by Michael or Yumi. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing fantastic. It's certainly been a bit of a break between our podcasts. Obviously, there's been quite a lot that's transpired in our absence. So interested in to sort of picking your brains about it and sort of getting everybody up to date about what's happened.
Yeah, it's been I feel like all of it's gone down in like the last week as well. There's just so much going on. There was so much to try and keep up with as well. Obviously, it was good to see that UK CS:GO News released an article for the first time in feels like a proper article that's not about Epic Land or Insomnia in I want to say months at least anyway. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Obviously, as everyone knows, there's been a bit of an org swap going on. Everyone's going to this org and then that org and then that this person's not in an org anymore. It's been confusing, but obviously, me and Michael, we're experts, so we're here to break that down for you. Obviously, so now we will start with the org swap mania that's gone on, and we'll start with the London parting ways with their roster. Obviously, this is a roster they've had for a few months now, first picking it up and basically giving the London esports name a brand. I'd never heard of the organisation before, but it seems they've been trying to provide, or tried to provide at least, this team everything they could. From what I could gather in the situation, it's just partnership didn't work out, couldn't basically fulfill the needs of this team as well. So obviously they went to look elsewhere. There was a bit of drama on, I wouldn't say drama, someone, I believe, I can't remember who it was, made a comment about them not wearing shirts at LAN or something like that.
That was Shiki. That was Shiki, I believe.
My mate Shiki then. I'm not sure what that was about. Unfortunately, it wasn't at LAN, but it seems that partnership has come to the end. What do you think about that, Yumi?
Yeah, I mean it's odd because, like you said, London were a brand that they had entered CS before. I think they had a team that competed Epic 24 that didn't go too far. But since then, picking up sort of a very like a significant upgrade in the team that they were presented with, and winning so many events, it's a bit odd that the org and them haven't been able to keep things amicable and like stay together. But I mean, I suppose these things do sort of happen. Maybe the expectations of the players or the expectations of the org just don't align with what they're actually being provided, and then suddenly you have this bit of friction between the org owners and the players. So it's a bit surprising, but maybe after Epic 26, where they did actually go down to the aptly named London Slayers, it may have triggered something either within the players or the organization to look out for new opportunities.
Yeah, but as far as I was able to gather from this situation, it seems it was more on the decision of the players to leave. From what I could gather from people I talked to, was basically that the organization, was the expectations of the organization. They had the certain expectations, but they just wanted something better, basically. And that's fair enough for any player. If they want to try and succeed at this game, they need the backing, they need the support, they need to have this funding, especially for a team like that where they require full funding to get to lands, etc., etc. Because they will come back and bring you prize pools. Obviously, they're going to start competing in Europe in advance, which we'll get to later. But this seemed to set off a sort of chain of events. This one dropping, which is why I wanted to start with it first, because we will look at next is Fierce Esports. Obviously, been in just a little bit, been in CS just a little bit longer than London had been. Obviously, at Epic 23, 22 was it 23 or 20?
24, I believe.
Sorry, yes,
Yeah,
24,
would
because
have
that
been
was the
the
one.
debut.
Yeah, because that was the one we attended that they got to the finals in. Basically, they were promised for that event that if they won, they'd get to keep the computers as well. And then from there, they sort of played out. Roster changes happened. The roster started to, unfortunately, sort of go off a bit of a cliff. Really, they couldn't keep up the same results. And
Actually, no, it was Epic 25. Sorry, I was trying to remember because obviously it was the event that you were at as well, but you didn't get to
yes,
attend 24 because
yes, because Epic
reasons.
25 was 2 epics ago now, wasn't it?
Yes.
And Epic 26 is the last one. Yeah, so sorry about that. But yeah, so um, it should be now that obviously Fierce Esports decided to drop their roster. At the time of the dropping, the roster was, I believe, Capers, Emin, Carcass, Hype, and FSAM.
Hmm.
Um, as far as I believe right now, that roster is currently not stayed together in full. I believe the core players of Capers, Emin, and Hype are currently playing together. Is what I saw. Actually, I think Carcass is still playing with them, but Whisk is currently in that roster. But we will again
Hmm.
come a bit later to that. But this surprised me a little bit as well. It sort of came out of the middle of nowhere for me personally, and it did seem like this was set off obviously by London leaving or the players leaving London.
And I think as well that the fact that Fierce, I mean, their expectations going to Epic 25 were to win the event. They came second. They underwent roster changes after that. Epic 26, they didn't go too far. It wasn't exactly a standout performance by that roster, and I think it. We touched on it on the previous podcast in that the expectations do have to be somewhat managed just based on the sort of tenure of the players attending the event. Um, but there's I imagine it's following that same sort of vein. If they didn't pull off at something spectacular, pull off good results at that LAN, then suddenly they have to start looking and shifting players around.
Yeah, I mean, after Epic 25, we saw that they sort of felt a bit defeated in what they went on to do after that. They tried to obviously get into Tong,
Yep.
didn't work out, and then they lose Swaggy as well, who I thought was a crucial player to that roster at the time. They had sort of minimal success without him. They obviously did well in qualifiers with Tatong and Swaggy, and then after what it felt 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that roster just fell apart. It didn't look good at all. They then obviously have now been dropped, and that is unfortunate, or at least it was by mutual consent. But what I will show you next, which will be that Fierce Esports then announced X London. It seems that Fierce probably made the decision as an organisation to get London in, or X London in, instead of this team, which in my opinion, is a better decision to make at the time of the. That's not the right one. Um, it is, yes, that one. So yeah, obviously that's the entirety of that Fierce Esports lineup, and you'll see a notable name at the bottom there. Obviously ZNX. Was sort of a bit unsure of whether he was confirmed for that roster. It was believed that he was on a trial at the time of this. He was playing in
Yeah.
ESEA with them. Um, However, we will get to that in a moment as well. But from this, it kind of makes it clear to me that Fierce made a decision as an organisation to. I assume they must have been contacted by someone from X London. Obviously, Fierce have the backing of their company as well. They're a sort of subsection of Fierce PC
Yeah.
Ltd. Um, which I assume has more backing, more funding. If you look at the sponsors for that, Fierce Esports as well, you'd sort of assume that it was a better funded or better backed organisation at the very least. But did this pickup surprise you, Yumi?
I'm I mean, to go from one organization to the next, especially a competitor, it did sort of catch me out. I was a bit surprised that that was the move that was made, as opposed to some sort of. I would have probably been expecting some sort of third party coming out of the woodworks, maybe an older organization that we haven't seen too much of that is maybe trying to reemerge themselves as a premier UKCS names. Some in the lines of oh, I'm trying to think of a good one. Maybe even a Radix or
Yeah,
something along those lines where they've had EPS finals before. They've been able to. Uh, a lot of those players from that old Radix lineup are still sort of kicking about and are still extremely talented players, but just haven't been able to reach that forefront again. So I would have been less surprised if something like that happened, but going straight to a competitor and one that you've actually been able to somewhat dominate in terms of the global, or rather the UK internal ranking system, is a bit odd.
Yeah, I exactly see what you mean there. It felt just sort of the best way to describe it is just caught me off because it's
Mhm.
this sort of chain of events happened. I wasn't sure if ZNext was even in the team. I was aware that there had been a change or that a player had left. That obviously being Ardis. I'm not sure the reason for that. From what I was told, something to do with possibly university or something like that. Obviously, I don't want to speculate on the reason because I do not know at all. But what we will also look at now is I think firstly we'll look at ZNext, the tweet that he put up, which was not even a week, definitely not even a week after this tweet went up. Um, it should be coming up now that basically he has mutually had his contract. Him and the organisation have decided to part ways. Um, I feel quite bad for ZNX.
Yeah.
I feel like he's a very skilled player, very good player individually, makes the correct decisions in the right places. I personally thought he'd outgrown CEX. That's my opinion. I thought he could have done better, and I thought the team like CEX, London, could be good for him. But yeah, it just seems a bit odd to me.
Yeah, I mean, he's actually fully committed to leaving his team in CEX. As far as I'm aware, he was. I mean, if you're making an announcement like this, he's probably under contract with Fierce, and then little over or a little bit under a week, he's straight up gone from the roster, and I think they're actually playing with Stanley as his replacement.
Yeah,
And if you remember Stanley, I'm pretty sure he played on the London roster previously, but
when it
had
when it first
been,
came about.
yeah, but had subsequently been kicked alongside, I think it was Link.
Link. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a bit odd that they're going back to sort of the for maybe a lack of a better analogy, just the ex-girlfriend, and bringing him back into the roster. And I anticipate that they might reach the same conclusion or similar issues down the line, and then suddenly you have to look for another player again. Um, eh, 2 to 3 weeks in trial doesn't seem like enough time for a player to fully integrate into a system. And I mean, we can only really speculate about why everything has gone astray, but given that they had played very few officials with him, and given that it was such a short period of time, it has to be something to do with either performance or maybe attitude or just maybe a communication issue.
Sometimes it does. It simply just comes down to they just don't mix. They don't mix well together. He couldn't fit into the system, or they didn't want to make changes to the system around him, or he couldn't make changes to himself.
But then what was the trial period for?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right. It's unfortunate it comes to this, but I believe ZNX is good enough to land up pretty much at any top UK team, probably below at this point the endpoint London's. Anywhere it'd be an upgrade to get him into any team. I think I saw a few people telling me, "Oh yeah, he should go to like a team like Revelation or something like that." I completely disagree. Revelation shouldn't make any changes.
Mhm.
They've had so much success recently as that roster, and we really need these UK teams to get into their head. Even when you're doing well, what's the point of making a roster change? You never know what's going to happen. If you are going to lose a player, sure, you get someone like Zed Nexon, and he's a great player, fantastic player. But I think he'd
I
be best
actually
suited as in another team.
Yeah, I actually think because we were talking about how the core for the X Fierce guys, Cape's, Hype, and Evan, were kind of kicking about and looking for an organization, that could be a potential slot for him where uh, that X Fierce lineup had seen better days. They maybe need an additional bit of star power to come into the roster. And although it even when he had joined CEX, it did take him some time to get sort of into good
Settled.
form.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did take him some time to get integrated into the system. I feel like that's probably something that you're going to want to undertake if you're that LF org uh, roster. I mean, that has
Best
to,
name I've ever seen for a team that's not well for the current meta of the game.
yeah.
It just makes me laugh every time.
But I mean, that has to be on the cards, right?
Yeah,
You've kept three core players. You have to restructure anyway.
yeah, and I like you're talking about there. From what we can tell, LF Org have picked up Whisk.
Yep.
And as far as we're concerned, I don't think it's a trial. I think he has just basically confirmed his place in their roster. Can't imagine he needs to be given much of a trial because they're probably just going to rebuild as a team together.
And
Yeah,
Whisk is a part of the a team that we haven't touched on just yet, but
which yes, that's what we'll move to next then. So coming up now should be that obviously the Neds team were picked up by an organisation. The coach of Neds here, Michael Yumi Cassidy, he's going to lead them to
allegedly the
victory.
coach.
Sorry, um, but yeah, so that should be coming up on your screen now. Is basically they were picked up by Reflex, which is an organisation that we saw at Epic 26. Obviously, they fielded that mixed lineup, which had Whisk in it. It was basically Dizlown and Whisk because Mezzi couldn't attend, I want to say.
Mhm.
So yeah, they'll be attending Insomnia, and obviously they are currently playing in EPS. And in fact, we'll get to something about them in EPS later. But what you told me, Yumi, was that it's apparently Brody there to replace Whis now.
Yes, yeah, no. Because Whisk has gone and joined that LF org team, it's left them with a bit of a void. Obviously, as soon as the announcement comes out, it's the next couple of days. There's a tweet from Mog asking for anybody that's LF1 or they're looking for one player to fill their roster. And you'd think just after you get a new organization, team would stick together, especially considering that they've been able to turn around and do pretty well in their official games.
Yeah,
Um, a roster move, or rather a player leaving from the roster, doesn't is obviously not ideal, but Brody is a player that really surprised a lot of people going into Epic 26. That roster that he fielded, I think it was MT, Danny, Cypher,
and Rest,
and Rest. Yes, that's the one.
Water Walkers, and
Yeah,
we had them, I think, both at like sort of 10th place, and they finished. I finished, I want to say 5th to 6th, I think.
yeah, something along those lines. They're definitely within the top 8, but that was certainly more than we were expecting from a roster that was basically a mix, or
Yeah,
actually fully a mix. Sorry.
hmm
Um,
yeah.
so
I
yeah,
mean,
he seems like a good fit for them, and he's been able to take up that mantle rather swiftly. So
yeah, maybe they've just got the timing a little bit wrong though, because possibly someone like Zed Next could come into that team. Um, I assume he's going to want to continue on playing. Obviously in the tweet that we saw earlier, he's looking for options. Obviously he played on. When I first heard of him, he was playing on Planet Key Dynamics. Maybe
Mhm.
he'll look for European options. It doesn't. I mean, that's a lot of the problem anyway. Maybe he doesn't want to be recycled. I assume he's not going to rejoin CEX. I don't think that'd make sense this time anyway. CEX are a fantastic team, no doubt about that. But I think he's sort of eclipsed that team in general. Um,
It'll be
I
sort of bittersweet as well to go crawling
leave.
back
Yeah,
to your old roster and be like, nobody picked me up in the end, boys.
exactly, and that would be it'd be quite awkward for him. But now, uh, yes, okay, so we do have that. This was the most surprising roster swap for me. London Esports welcomed Dizlan to the organisation. I was completely caught. The other things caught me off guard, and I saw this and I thought, has someone tweeted this as a joke? What's gone on here? Why's this happened? Um,
Bit early for April Fools.
exactly, that's what I thought, and then apparently it's true. All I can assume is they were given a better deal or given better whatever, or Disland didn't. I can't imagine Disland wanted to not continue the partnership on because they were playing so well. Um, so I assume again this is a player decision. I'm not quite sure. This was incredibly surprising for me.
Well, as well, the players will talk to one another, right? So they maybe have caught wind of the fact that a couple of organization swaps were occurring, and so then you just send a message around like, "Hey, so I've heard you're losing your roster,"
It'd
which
be a
is
shame if I did something about it.
yeah, and it does seem like they've been able to just take that up straight away. Almost as soon as we had found out about the London to Fear swap, the London esports team just announced that they've picked up X Disloan. And like you said, it was completely out of left field in the fact that Disloan I would imagine didn't have too much representation in that team because obviously they went under the Reflex banner for Epic 26. So they've only really represented Dislone in
ECA and
ECA.
EPS.
Yeah.
So I don't know. A confusing one. It's just gotta be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it certainly has to be what the organization is providing, right? That you don't jump to a team. I mean, obviously London have seen good success in their limited amount of time in the UK scene, but it has to be something to do with either uh, funding, or maybe they're friends with the org owners, and
yeah.
maybe they just reached an agreement rather quickly.
You got to remember also Disneyland is a French organisation, so maybe returning to a UK organisation, given the
Yeah.
same deal, and maybe it just made more sense for them to go to that. Um, the thing is, Disneyland used to have an incredible, it used to have a pretty good sort of tier 3 French team. When I was sort of casting around that area, they were a team that would always pop up. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's got people like what are the two on G2 now? They used to have um, used to have some pretty good French players on it, basically, and they were a decent French team, and I assume the organisation had decent backing. But again, there's multitude of reasons that could have come up because of this, and it would take me hours to go through every single reason, explain why or why not that could be going on. But that is pretty much the end of this sort of org swap, roster swap mania. Um, yeah, I guess the only thing really to mention is LF Org are obviously looking for an organisation, and for most organisations in the UK, it'd be a worthwhile pick up once they complete their roster, because they will be able to get into that prize pool area, I think.
We did have the final announcement of Endpoint as well, in the fact that they've actually fully picked up Impulse in the
Oh
end.
yes, yeah, that is. I completely forgot about that because that is two
Yeah,
weeks ago now.
they've obviously,
They
they've
confirmed
obviously
it.
as well been a part of that roster for a bit. So
Yeah, because obviously in the last episode, me and Yumi talked about it. Is basically they were they were sort of trialing with roster. They'd done decently well in a lot of what they had done. So I assume they just confirmed that. Obviously, I like the route they've tried to take. They're not just going to recycle talent from the old endpoint rosters. They've gone out, had a look at some good European talent, did well in Valiance before. Obviously, unfortunately, people like Esperanto came in and took their places. So I'm glad to see them obviously confirm their spot in Endpoint. We'll have to see obviously what they can do. I assume they'll be sending Insomnias, etc., together in the near future.
yeah, I think that's a fair assumption to make. I think they're. I'm trying to think if we're missing one team. I think Exilia.
Yes, Sensei, which is Swaggy's
Yes.
team, had recently been picked up by Exilium. Um, Uh, I don't believe I got a screen. No, I didn't get a screenshot of that. But basically, the Sensei roster, who obviously playing in Esea Advanced, not in EPS currently. They are, I think, I want to say about 10-1 in UK Open. Last time I checked, so I assume they're going to go for that relegation battle. Um, but they have been picked up by Exilium, which was surprising again to me because Exilium is an organisation that previously has had an Inters roster and an Open roster, so it's not exactly sort of scraping the top
Yeah.
echelons of the scene.
Not really the same
But
conversation.
yeah, exactly. But at least the likes of Swaggy to Tong have got a home now because they are good players. You know, they didn't fit into the previous roster or whatever happened there, but they are good players. There's no doubt about that. It's whether they can grind as this team and see out the rest of the advanced. But now we will move into the EPS season. Obviously, since last time we covered it, we did weeks 1 and we've got week 3 up until about week 6 to cover now. But coming up on the screen should be week 3 initially. Obviously, the big point there for me in week 3 is to see that Revelation were still going strong. And this is basically just continued success for this roster. Basically, with 9 points at that point, they'd secured their spot at playoffs in the online playoffs at least. It came down to whether they were going to get that first spot basically straight into the finals. London Esports again were topping their group. They had no real competition up until week 3. Everyone was basically fighting among themselves. Obviously, pensioners again 0-3, not doing too good in this current week. We'll see a little bit more about them later, and we'll discuss who was able to join the pensioners roster. So that's pretty much week 3, unless you've got anything else to say, Yumi.
No, I think it's about summed up as it gets. Obviously, because we've got 3 weeks to sort of chime through. The results are already in, so
Yeah,
we can kind of talk about the overarching story going into the EPS finals.
exactly. This is basically what we tried to do now. It's just we'll look at the weeks, and when we get to the end, we'll discuss obviously who's made playoffs, who we think is going to do well at playoffs, the LAN finals, as well. But now we move on to week 4, and Revelation secure their spot at the live finals in Manchester at I believe the 31st of
30th,
March.
yeah, 30th or 31st of March. I think
Yeah.
the Friday is when players start traveling out. So
I assume that they'll probably have to do a media day, etc., etc. But I mean, I expected Revelation out of that group to make playoffs, but to dominate their group in the way they did. At this point, I believe this is the second time they'd played. Yes, this would have been the rematch against Endpoint this week, where this was with the new roster for Endpoint, and they still won 16-6, I believe the scoreline was for that. And this is basically just an overarching storyline of Revelation's continued success, grinding out from the lower levels and making their way up and absolutely banging it out in EPS.
yeah, they've been doing a really good job. I mean, when you looked at the group going into EPS, we just 100% thought that Endpoint were probably going to be the ones that walk away with the first place in that group, and then you have Revelation or Dislone taking that second, third. But that's decidedly not the point. I don't think pensioners were really in the conversation. They've kind of gone as expectations go.
Yeah,
But yeah, Revelation have surprised a lot of people, and I think this season in particular was a great time for them to be able to take on the likes of an Endpoint or a Dislone, because Dislone's a newly formed roster, or was a newly formed roster at the start of the EPS season. And then you have Endpoint with that sort of rotating door where they're trialing players as they go, and they have to play officials during that time as well. So I certainly think the timing favors them as well, but they've been able to show very convincing performances. I mean, you can see it even just in the score difference, right? 64-35. That is
yeah,
is pretty dominant. I mean, almost double the rounds.
exactly. They're the second team in their group to have a positive round sort of difference is Endpoint, and that's by 6 rounds. You know,
Mhm.
at this point in week 4, no one was close to Revelation. It didn't look like they were really close to losing it most of the times. There was a few, obviously, decently close scorelines as we go further on, and we'll see that scoreline, change at least.
Mhm.
London Esports, obviously top of their group at this point. Again, expected CEX. Disappointing what they're able to do in EPS. Basically, week 4 was. It comes down to week 5 for them if they wanted to attempt to make playoffs, because obviously it's still only one win away from being at equal on points, but it was still going to be a difficult fight for them. All in all, that is week 4 completely done though, and we will move on now to week 5. And here we go. At this point, unfortunately, we do see that Revelation suffer their first loss, and I believe this was to Dislone. I believe. Um, I think so anyway. And pensioners actually, I can't remember. Either way, they were suffered their first loss, which is unfortunate for them. Obviously, going 4-1, they've secured their spot at LAN, so these games really don't mean anything. It's about giving yourself confidence going into the event. You see there as well that Fierce Esports have taken over first place. This at the time is X Fierce, by the way. I believe the org swaps don't come in until the final week, I want to say, which is the next one. So this is the old Fierce or X Fierce now, who are currently top of their group due to it has to be round difference. Reflex on equal points as well at third. CX, they have been put into the relegation zone. There is no way for them to qualify for playoffs at all, so they are put into relegation. Obviously, if you look at second, third, and fourth in Group B as well, it was coming down to week 6.
Yeah, it's an all the way tie. That is I mean, you have the same thing on the other side of the bracket, but that is not where you want to be. You have a very clear winner of the group, and then everyone else is just fighting to stay out of that sort of relegation spot, right? So yeah, it's not looking it wasn't looking the best, at least at that time.
Yeah, and to point out, obviously, Reflex have changed from Neds to Reflex, and they were
They
0 and
started the
2.
season 0-2.
0
Yeah.
and 2. The reverse sweep secure themselves playoffs. It looked like it was going to be a battle between them and CEX. In the end, doesn't matter. They managed to qualify for playoffs. And if we have a look at the final week now, let me get this up on my second monitor. They top their group. They go straight to the semi-finals. There's no online playoff for them. It's just straight to the live finals in Manchester. Um, I assume they will play this whoever wins the online playoff from Group B, and then Revelation will play whoever wins from Group A. But obviously, you can see all the teams have changed now as well. Fierce Esports, formerly London, finished second. They will now have to battle it out in the online playoffs. LF Org obviously secured their spot last week, so it didn't matter. CEX again have been relegated. They will have to fight it out against whoever wins UK Open, whoever makes the playoffs there as well. And Pensioners, again, I believe they were 0 and 3. I think I want to say
They've bounced back.
for a very good reason. We
Yeah,
will like
yeah,
to add
of course.
the addition of Lazar Smuya. I'm not sure if Cyril was playing in the roster at the start of the season, but I know he was. Shaney's thrown in there. He's been playing from the start as well. But I mean, that's
Yeah,
unfortunate for Endpoint, basically. Unlucky, really.
yeah. I mean, picking up some wins to the end of the season, they keep themselves out of the relegation spot. But yeah, Endpoint's the one that suffers the consequence of it. Uh, I mean, going into the start of this group, if you at the start of EPS said that Endpoint were gonna bottom out in Group B, I would have thought you were lying. Just your analysis is just all wrong. But here we are, 6 weeks later, and you have the likes of Revelation, a complete sort of X factor coming into this EPS season, and Neds and Reflex. Extremely surprising, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, no one would have expected Reflex and Revelation to be the ones who go automatically straight into the live finals. Endpoint will have to go into relegation as well. However, that is quite unfortunate for anyone who meets them in the UK Open. Whoever wins UK Open or makes the playoffs in UK Open to now have to face Endpoint in an online best of three. The chances of you making APS have become slightly lower. You're going to have to try and rely on beating CEX at this point, who don't usually lose to teams lower than them a lot anyway. They used, I mean, if you look at LAN, etc., they're able to close out against teams that are significantly lower than them. So that will be a tough battle. But now it's basically just, what are your predictions for this upcoming Monday's playoffs between Fierce Esports, LF Org, Pensioners, London Esports? Who for you is going to make it through there?
I mean, it depends what pensioners roster ends up showing up, I suppose.
Yes.
I think in Group B, it'd be silly to put anything but London Esports, in my opinion. I think that Dislone core and now London Esports side has a lot of ambition, and I think they certainly can make it to the finals. I don't believe pensioners have much structure. Whereas on the other side of things, I think the fierce LF Org one is a bit more of a toss up, right? You've got the you've got the London esports guys, and you have this LF Org team where they also don't have much structure, but we're one of uh the sort of top three favorites coming into this. So I think there's certainly an upset that could potentially happen, but it'd have to be fierce to secure the second spot.
Yeah, and Fraser's just confirmed the matchup as well. So London, they will play Fierce, and obviously Pensioners then have to play
Oh,
LF Org,
okay.
which makes sense. It's the 2-3-3-2 kind of thing. So it's
No,
basically
yeah,
just
yeah,
the
okay.
opposite. For me, like you said, Fierce London is going to be a tough game for London. It's certainly winnable, but it's going. I'm not going to give my prediction for that because I think it will just be in it's going to come up to the maps picked, how the veto goes, and how London play on the day. Pensioners LF4, if Pensioners fill the roster they have for the past 2 weeks, then for me it's Pensioners. LF4 are currently in this weird spot where they're sort of switching players around and they are trying to find an organisation, which sort of leaves you in a bit of limbo. So for me personally, I think we will probably see Pensioners go through to those live finals where I imagine they'll play Reflex, and if that's the case, because I can't imagine you play the same person who's been in your group, I think.
Yeah, I'd imagine you're on the other side of the brackets.
Yeah. I imagine they actually did reverse the bracket. Shout out to what happened at Finland. Loves it. But yeah, that's pretty much EPS. We covered every single week, gave our playoffs predictions. Obviously, that is on Monday. I believe it starts 7 p.m. is the online playoffs. What we will quickly show you is the graphic for the live finals. So if you do want to go see it, it'll be an interesting show for sure. I was thinking maybe I'll pop up to Manchester and have a watch. It's going to be a real test for Revelation, I think, those live finals, because obviously they've been given this gift that is the live finals, not having to play through the online bracket. They've lost out now to Dislown, and I believe they lost. I think it was a very close game against Pensioners as well. I think it's 16-13 or something they lost. But yeah, Manchester, Bowler's Exhibition Centre on the 31st of March. Those will be the spring finals, obviously, which will conclude a very exciting EPS series. But now we will move quickly on to the ESEA standings, which we covered in our last episode as well. Since then, it has been about 2 or 3 weeks. So that's quite a lot of games. That's about, what do you play, 2 games a week, I think? So 6 games. I assume you can move more games into a week.
Teams rescheduled as well for lands and qualifiers, so
exactly,
there have been quite a few that have occurred for some of the teams.
So the first team we will look at are CEX, their advanced standings currently. The last time we looked at them, they were 3-3 in advanced. So we'll currently have a look and see how they've managed to do in the weeks that have passed. So they are currently 4-8, obviously not having ZDEX play for them. I believe they've been using James BT, I think for ESC.
Yes, I believe he's their replacement since ZNX had left.
Yeah, obviously he was the player there that was there before ZNX joined as well. So obviously he's just there to fill in at the time. I think that he's the only one who stood in for them. I think Yelm is the one who stands in for them in EPS, I want to say.
No, yeah, I think that's correct. I think James BT was James BT the one that had to play at last EPS finals for CX because Murky had injured.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, 4-8. He's got 16-1 by endpoint. Like I see there, that was the one that stood out to me. They've had a couple tough games, but unfortunately they are in dire need of some wins now, because otherwise they will be relegated into main, which is never a good feeling to get relegated out of any league. But basically we just want to have a quick review, see how everyone is doing. Won't talk too much about that. We will move on now to what is the next one. The next one is endpoint. So we'll have a look at the endpoint standings there. They have been doing pretty well. I believe you covered a game last night that they lost though, but other than that, they've been doing pretty well in the majority of the games they've played, which is good to see the turnaround from, wasn't an incredibly great start. It wasn't a bad start, but they're now just getting on with it. 10-4.
And
not a bad scoreline.
Their string of wins as well came off them playing with AVN and Impulses. When they joined the roster, so it's certainly a good sign that they're integrating well enough that they can compete at the advanced level. But it's about that has to be not really on your mind. You have to be thinking about MDL really if you're a team like Endpoint that fell from grace in the last season. It has to be about getting back into that spot. And so I think with 10 wins, they're just 1 or 2 shy of securing themselves playoffs.
I think it's 11 required to make playoffs, and I think if you get 10, you can, but it depends on round difference. Is what I understand.
Heads as well, so
exactly. So certainly very capable of making it to MDL once again. It's whether the question if can
No,
they
it's
hold
9
out?
wins and you
Can they
get
get that?
playoffs, apparently.
Oh, okay. It's 9 wins, did you say?
Yeah, yeah. According to Fraser, and he's a man in advanced himself, so I'll trust his judgment.
Oh, it must be a lower amount of teams in advance, and that's probably why. I think I'm going off.
Open and
I can't
enters,
remember.
probably.
I think it open and enters. Yeah, it's 10, 11, isn't it? And there's usually more teams, so that makes sense. Yeah. Well, that means they've secured playoffs, so good for them. We now look at X Fierced. As you'll see on the screen, it comes up with Fierce Esports is there. Obviously, that is not them anymore. They just haven't changed their name on ECA. The most recent standout loss for me, they are currently 5-8. Not a good scoreline. They are. I think it's 6 wins required to secure your spot.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that is based off main from when I was coaching in main. You needed 6 wins to secure your spot. But they lost to Exilium yesterday, the game that I was actually covering, 16-2. Obviously, they are basically mixing it out at this point, but
Mm-hmm.
16-2 to Exilium, who didn't have a great start to this season by any means. They were 2-5 or 2-6 or something like that. I want to say, but they've turned
They
it
had
around as well.
Yeah, they had suffered a lot of really close losses. I think when we
Yes,
last reviewed them, we were sort of in shock at how many 16-14s and overtimes and uh, yeah, it just seemed like they had issues either closing things out or just securing a round advantage and always had to fight from behind them. But yeah, that's not a good look if you're LFO 16-2 on train as well. A map that I'm pretty sure they were that roster, at least when they had obviously older iterations alongside Totem G and Swaggy. Train was a pretty comfortable map pick, if I'm not mistaken. So
yes, I believe so.
um, yeah,
Um,
to lose in a way like that, so close to the end of the advanced season as well, is not the that's not the greatest, especially when you're looking for an organization that can that can be looked at.
Exactly, and you really want to try and keep your spot as well to make sure that the organisation you pick up is giving you what you require.
Mhm.
But that's basically it for XFierce. Obviously, need to get some wins on the board now in the last few games of the season. But we will move over now to Exilium, who are currently 6-8. I believe they have secured their spot in advance for next season at least. I don't believe there's a chance they can make playoffs because of the 8 losses. And I believe they've only got something like 2 games left anyway. So, you know, all good, I guess. Obviously, you really want to try and make playoffs in these, but keeping your spot, getting that, because obviously they've had roster changes as well. Like if Eura, etc., have walked in, Isk, part of the roster as well, walked out. So now it's about getting that stability. I saw the eyebrow raise.
Yeah.
Getting that stability into the roster and then moving on into the next season and getting it's more important, obviously, that you focus on keeping your spot when you go that far behind. But again, beating out Fierce Esports 16-2. They had a loss earlier on in the day as well. To be able to bounce back from that hard is pretty good. Um, but yeah, fair enough to Exilium. They've clearly worked. They've clearly grinded. And now they've secured their spot next season of Advanced. Now we look at the actual Fierce Esports, who were formerly London, obviously now switched up. They've had to unfortunately sort of go for a Fierce Esports where it's joined together because Fierce Esports haven't changed their name. So they've been doing pretty good. Obviously they've had 8 wins, 5 losses, still can make playoffs. And I imagine they will make playoffs at this point. I can't see them not, to be honest. They've had some decent wins, some unfortunate losses. Still got to play their game against Golden Kitty, it seems, unless that's like some default that's not gone through. But obviously they were using ZNX. Like you said, now Stanley's in that roster as well. He's been playing the last couple of games. Just based on the pure individuals in that team, it wouldn't surprise me if they make playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, on an individual level, they're certainly, I think, buying away much more successful, um, and more skilled than you have the other UK teams in the advanced season. I think Endpoint's the only one that's a bit of a question mark because you have these players that haven't really had a head to head, at least in their current state of their rosters. So it is kind of hard to tell. We'd always sort of said when the old London, or I suppose this fierce esports roster were playing up against Endpoint, is that you don't really know how much preparation that they've been able to get. But now that sort of months have passed, these head to heads, when we're presented with them, will give us a better indication of how well the players match up on an individual level. I think on a team based level, they certainly have had enough time to create the structure and the systems in which they want to operate in, as well as sort of iron out their map pool. So I think moving forward, if Endpoint have been able to secure themselves into playoffs with the 10-5, I think Fierce are likely not far behind. I think is exactly what you said.
Yeah. And now we move on to London Esports, which is formerly Dislam. They are currently 8-6. Again, can still make playoffs. They've secured their spot at least as well for the next season. I hope they make playoffs. I didn't take a screenshot of their next matches, so I can't judge how hard it is going to be for them to make it. But I'm sure Fraser has the confidence, as he always does, that he can make it into those games. It looks like we're possibly looking at the majority of the UK teams this season making playoffs. It just comes down to the last couple of games. Obviously, again, this London team has it in them to make it to playoffs. The individuals there alone should be able to secure that, but they've started to build up this system. Obviously, got a decent coach as well, which always helps. I feel like a lot of these teams at this level need to get coaches. I think Revelation as well got a good coach in Duka, who has done a lot of work. And, a lot of the times these coaches don't get credit for what they do within these teams. So hopefully we give Breaking that credit there. But London, they can still make playoffs. Just got to keep high hopes for them. Yeah, of course, Fraser knows he'll make it. We'll check back. We'll check back on that, but I imagine he will. The final team that we have to look at is Revelation, who are currently 8-6. It's basically been they had sort of a string of wins, then a loss, win, loss, loss, win, win, loss, win. It's back and forth between them. Again, they can still make playoffs. Don't know what their next matches are, but I believe, one win, like Fraser said in chat, that it is only 9 wins to get playoffs. I would hope Revelation, considering the form they've been on, would make playoffs. It'd be highly disappointing making live finals in first place out of your group and then not even making an advanced playoffs. Making MDL is a whole different beast. You have to go through the MDL relegation and then play. You obviously got to play advanced playoffs and then etc. etc. It's going to be incredibly difficult to get to MDL. But considering how they've played throughout the season, I'd at least hope them to make playoffs.
Yeah, if you kind of teams like Endpoint that are currently bottoming out in your group in EPS, and then have them make ESEA Advanced playoffs and you fall short. That is the nature of Counter-Strike. Sometimes the matchups and who you
Best of ones.
play and
Yep.
and where you end up. Because obviously when you start your season, you start going maybe 4-1, 5-0, something like that. Then you start playing teams that are also 5-0, and you start to get brought down to earth a little bit more. You're like, oh, we can actually lose. So yeah, I think high hopes for both those teams. Obviously, we don't want to see anything but UKCS succeed, but if they do not make ESEA Advanced playoffs, that would be a huge shortcoming considering where they stand in EPS.
Exactly, yeah. Maybe EPS is not a fair sort of correlation, but if you look at some of the teams that are playing in EPS, Endpoint, etc., London, are these teams that are good? Oh, sorry, ex-London, now Fierce, still confuses me. They are good teams that can play at an advanced level, can play at, the majority of London, sorry, now Fierce, is used to play in MDL. Endpoint, all those players have played in MDL. Alliance players now joined Endpoint, so I think it probably is a fair assumption to say if you do well in EPS, you should do at least securing your spot. But if you look at these teams, how they've played at LAN, etc., etc., so much points for them being able to make playoffs. But that is pretty much it for ECA standings. We just like to have a look. Obviously, this is definitely the most UK teams that have ever been at Advanced. Obviously, Advanced have been around 3-4 seasons now, but it used to be ECA main that was just had about 8 or 10 ECA, 8 or 10 UK teams. But now we've got a lot of UKCS to look forward to. Obviously, 3 or 4 could still make playoffs. We'll hope out and maybe we have a look at those games, cover them on our Twitches, whatnot. Now, quickly, really we need to mention this. It'd be unfair to Mighty Max not to mention, obviously, the issues that have surrounded EPS. As much as we have previously praised EPS and what they've been able to do for the scene, you know, the prize pool they interjet, they give LAN experience with a crowd in front of you. We won't show you the TwitLonger itself. In terms of, go look at his Twitter. It's an interesting read. And there was fallout from that as well. Basically, I will run it down now. Is that Mighty Max spotted sort of irregularities with the admins and what they were able to do, allowing people joining rosters when they shouldn't have been, not being fair to end, or they were enforcing the rules of endpoint fairly, is what he basically said. But that was not being applied to pensioners who are allowed to get Lazar, Smurin, etc., with I think 24 hours notice, less than I think 24 hours notice, 2 hours before, something like that. Anyways, which is obviously not a fault of the pensioners. They're not the ones who do. They're not the ones who are handing out rules. They are not the ones that are making the rule book. And it's basically came down to Mighty Max messaged all this to the admin, and he basically just said that we can create rules when we want without informing you, which to me seems irresponsible. They changed the communication method. It used to be via email. They didn't tell anyone about that. They just basically used Discord, or didn't tell Endpoint about that anyway. And that it was changed in the rules, etc., etc. And then Mighty Max tweeted this. It was fair criticism to put publicly. I thought personally. I assume you agree, Yumi. Now, it is quite a complicated situation. I recommend you read it yourself, because there's lots of ins and outs, lots of screenshots to prove Mighty Max's point. And other people have said on Twitter that they had suffered the same fate via the Esea admins not being consistent, you know, changing games around when they shouldn't have been, or not informing them quick enough, etc., etc. And then, after this tweet had gone live, a couple hundred likes, you know, a lot of responses, a lot of people saying, you know, they shouldn't do this. Endpoint were basically given 14 points against them. So basically, what there can be is you can either get 2 minor points or 2 minor sort of faults and 1 major. They got 14. Now, if you put logic together, I think it was New M that said 2 minors should be 5 each, and 1 major should be 10. But somehow they've got 14 points out of this. Now, I'm not sure what the punishment is at 14 points, because I was discussing this with you as well, Yumi. Does that mean they take 14 points directly out of their standings, or does that mean it comes against them, or does that mean they get fined, or
I believe I actually have an answer to that, but
okay.
I would also have to be breaking confidentiality agreements, and I'm not allowed to, and I can't do that. So
exactly, yeah.
Because although I'm not technically the coach, I am officially the coach, so I can't say anything about EPS. But yeah, I mean, we were just kind of left to speculate about what these penalty points would lead to, and I think the fact that this has come to light and it's been addressed in this manner. I mean, the fact that there is a rule in the rulebook, as most tournament organizers do have, that they can amend any rule, or they have like basically full rulebook flexibility. You shouldn't ever be really using it. Those are meant for extremely dire circumstances
or an odd situation that should come about that no one foresaw, or something like that. But then just completely going around and changing something, and then just saying, no, you know, we'll just change it from 2 days ago because you messaged.
Yeah, and the primary thing was, I think, as well, that the endpoint players weren't informed. I think it says in the rulebook that the primary method of communication will be email, and that was obviously not utilized. So it's sort of, is it the primary source of communication? I mean, I know they're all in a Discord, but is that the direct channel that they're supposed to be able to use and get in touch with the teams? It's not supposed to be, but it seems
but then
like
it was changed by that in the rulebook. And then Mighty Max made a very good point as well. Surely, if you're changing the direct form of communication, can you not send out an email to say, now we're using this? It was to Masmal they are out of EPS no matter what the punishment put down onto them is. Unfortunately, they lost their game, so they weren't able to qualify. But I assume this would have had some sort of adverse effect on them going into EPS or making playoffs or something like that anyway. But it just seems like a very awkward situation. This happened again with the previous EPS and the winter ones, where they basically changed it to an online MGL thing without basically telling anyone until 10 days before or something like that. And as much as ESL UK do good, this is something they shouldn't have done, or they did it poorly. Maybe they need to explain themselves a little bit more. I haven't seen any official statement from any admins. All I know is that Mighty Max and his team were the reason they were penaltied, by the way, is because of the tweet, not because they were messaging admins, etc., because like Humi said, you cannot break the confidentiality. That is a rule in it. So that tweeting that was seen to be breaking that is unfortunate for Endpoint. Unfair, I think, to treat them in such a way when they're such a historical organization and give unfair treatment or preferential treatment to another team because of who's in it, etc. We don't know why they're doing that, so that's up to the.
Yeah, I think there's two. You have to think of it in two perspectives, right? I mean, on the player side of things, Max is obviously inclined to address these issues and be like, "Hey, why are we not being treated as fairly as the other team? Or why are we getting a different set of treatments or rules applied to us that other teams don't have to abide by?" Whereas on the flip side of things, I think if you look at that pensioners roster, it may have been the fact that, hey, so we want to bring these players in because we physically cannot get other players to play our games, and that would just result in default losses and the team just basically not playing the rest of the season. In which case, as a tournament organizer, you're thinking, we need to somewhat accommodate a bit of leniency just because we need the league to actually run, right? There are still games to be played, and that can affect standings and who goes to EPS. Obviously, I don't think you can sort of plan for the players that ended up playing for pensioners. In the fact that one of them is actually contracted to another team, which is also another rule that has been amended to allow that change to occur. So I think that they tried to put a band-aid on the problem, but they had torn off a skin graft from an already living body to try and plug up the hole, and that just makes another hole. So
yeah, but this is a perfect analogy for this situation. And while we don't know the admin side, we need to wait to see that to really form full opinions. For what we've seen from Max himself, he's given a very clear picture, I think. But again, an admin may show something that disputes this, or etc. Maybe there was a transfer. Something I believe I saw from one of the Endpoint players. I might have been Max again tweeting basically. That another thing about players who are signed to organizations, etc., are not able to join. All these rules as well were put in to promote sort of roster stability, but when it's unfairly treatment, we've been through that. But we will have to wait for the ESL side. I imagine they will eventually make some sort of statement. I can't imagine this will go unanswered privately, at least. It'd be good to see some sort of public response. So, but that does basically bring an end to all the topics. Just one quick mention: everyone get signed up to Grosvenor. All the Grosvenor events, £12.50. PCs there. Just go play. It's cheap. It's if you're local to the area, or you've got a team that doesn't have to travel too far. You don't have to bring your PCs as well, which makes it so much easier. Obviously, I'll be at the Reading one this weekend, so come say hi as well. I'll be joined by Tweg there. I'm sure you will possibly. I will allude to possibly seeing Yumi at one of these events. I won't say which, or but possibly Michael will appear. He loves it really. He just loves it. So get signed up. It's been not as good a sign up as I would have liked to seen from some of these teams. It's a little LAN, good experience. Have a drink, do a little bit of betting while you're there. Why not? Obviously, you have to be above 18 to get into the casinos.
Of course. That's the big provision that's actually stumped a few players. But
yes, obviously teams like CEX, Murky, Revelation. Yeah, but from what I noticed, I think Russ and Impact are mixing the Reading one. But yeah, get signed up to this. It's £12.50 for entry. I think you just have to bring your keyboard, headset, and mouse, and that all fits in your bag.
And mousepad. Don't forget a mousepad.
Mousepad, of course, you cannot forget your mouse.
Last season, so many people forgot their mousepads, and we had like these small little replacement ones, just like, oh yeah, if you need a mouse pad, we can give you this, and people were just like, yeah, I'm gonna use the table. So don't be that guy. Bring your mouse pad.
Yes, Fraser, enjoy your boot camp at Adam's house. I do hope that goes well. Obviously, Fierce are attending Reading, so I would understand if a team wants to skip that, but it's still good fun. £12.50, come on, come down. Reading's not far away from anywhere, really. Train station is about a 5-minute walk. Get an Uber, get a taxi. You just find a way. Find a way. Thank you all, obviously, for joining me and Yumi today, and thank you to Fraser for doing a great job on production once again. Obviously, he's quite fancy. Works for very, very, very successful people. So just obviously be careful when talking to him, because he's actually bigger than me and Yumi in all aspects. And I'm gonna go on, otherwise I'm just gonna keep giving it to Fraser. But obviously, thank you all for watching. Thank you anyone's interacting in the chat. And if you do want to catch up for the rest of the episode, you can watch the Twitch VOD, or you can catch it on YouTube. That will be going up later tonight. Make sure to follow me and Yumi on Twitter at YumiTV for Yumi, at Rory Rogue for me, at Frozen Phaser for our producer as well, at Mac Control CS. If you want to keep updated on the UK scene, I retweet a lot of the org announcements, etc., match scores, stuff like that on that Twitter. So you want to keep updated, it's a great place to follow. Thank you all again for joining us, and we do appreciate everyone coming around and giving us the support. I hope you also enjoy, obviously, the new graphics that come out. Hopefully we'll have some added things to them when Fraser gets busy for once in his life. Obviously I'm kidding, but yeah, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
If you talk all the time, you'll never hear what anybody else has to say. And therefore, all you'll have to talk about is your own conversation. The same is true for people who think all the time. That means, when I use the word think, talking to yourself, subvocal conversation, the constant chit-chat of symbols and images and talk and words inside your skull.